My name is Perry, and welcome to the Literary Knitterary. Today is like not a good hair day, not a bad hair day, just a big hair day. There's just a lot of it. I haven't had a real haircut in 14 months. But anyway, welcome back to the 12 Days of Classics. Today we will be discussing books 3 and 4 of the Odyssey. If you missed yesterday's video talking about books 1 and 2, I will link that up above and down below for you. In book 3 of the Odyssey, Telemachus makes it to Pylos, where he speaks to Nestor and stays at Nestor's house. There's descriptions of the gifts and the hospitality that they receive there. And Nestor also tells them about the fates of different heroes who were at Troy, including Agamemnon, who was obviously murdered by his wife's lover Aeschylus, and Agamemnon's brother Menelaus, who was also blown off course and was in Egypt for a couple of years, so he actually didn't make it home until Orestes had already killed Aeschylus for killing Agamemnon and usurping the throne. And then basically Nestor tells Telemachus to take his son Pisistratus and go to Sparta to speak to Menelaus in person to see if he might have heard anything while he was being sort of blown about the ocean. And then in book 4 they make it to Sparta, they meet Menelaus and Helen. Menelaus expresses grief for the men that were lost at Troy and on the return home, especially Agamemnon and Odysseus. Telemachus cries about Odysseus. Helen realizes who he is. There's some stories told, including one told by Helen about how Odysseus disguised himself as an old beggar and used that trick to sneak around in Troy. And then Menelaus tells a story about how Odysseus acted inside the wooden horse. And then Menelaus tells the story about how on his return home from Troy, he was stuck in Egypt for a while because the gods were not sending him favorable wind. And in order to figure out who he had displeased and what he was supposed to do to actually make it home, Menelaus surprises the sea god Proteus and wrestles him and basically holds on to him as he changes his shape until Proteus finally succumbs and surrenders and agrees to tell Menelaus anything that Menelaus wants to know. So Proteus tells him about Agamemnon and Odysseus, and that's how Menelaus has this information. Meanwhile, in Ithaca, the suitors discover that Telemachus has gone to seek out information about his father and decide to ambush him in a ship while he's coming back and try to kill him and take his stuff. Book 4 is fun because it contains one of the most sort of wacky episodes, in my opinion. One of the things that stood out to me the most when I was first reading the Odyssey, and I was like, wait, what the hell? Wait, what? And that is when everybody is really sad about Odysseus being missing, and everybody's crying, and Helen is like, this is a bummer, I know what to do. I'm going to put drugs in the wine bowl, and then everyone will feel better. I remember reading that the first time and just being like, what? Especially since it's not like she asks or offers the room. She's just like, no, here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna mix the wine and I'm gonna put some stuff in it. So that's just wild. As an update on Rosy-Fingered Dawn, we did see about 4 instances of that epithet in books 3 and 4, some of which were pretty straightforward, like when newborn Dawn appeared with rosy fingers, but also some slight variations, as in lines, soon Dawn was born, her fingers bright with roses, or when Dawn appeared, her fingers bright with flowers, which again, I just really enjoy the decision to tweak the imagery slightly every time. In this case, we get the image of a young woman wearing flowers on her hands as decorations rather than the fingers themselves being pink or rosy in color. You know, it adds another layer of visual interest. There are a bunch of things coming up in books 3 and 4 that I already know are sort of recurring themes or motifs or concepts that are important to the work as a whole. So, for example, because of what's happening in the narrative at this point in time, with Telemachus visiting different people's houses, there's a heavy emphasis on the culture of hospitality, the way you welcome strangers into your house and provide for them, the giving of guest gifts, and the recurring importance of words like stranger and words like friend or guest friend, and the transition between those two states. We get a pretty clear example of the poem telling us that this culture of hospitality is important. When Telemachus and Pisistratus first arrive at Menelaus's house, a guard sees them first and runs inside to tell Menelaus, and he says, "Your Majesty, there are 2 men outside, strangers who seem like sons of Zeus. Please tell me, should we take off the harness from their horses or send them off to find another host?" Flushed, Menelaus shouted angrily, "You used to have some brains. Now you are talking like a silly child. We too were fed by many different hosts before returning home. As we may hope for Zeus to keep us safe in future times, untack their horses. lead them in to dine. So this illustrates both the importance of hospitality in this culture and also cites a few of the reasons for its importance, one of which being, the hope of reciprocity when you're in need, and the other of which being sort of the obligation to Zeus to shelter and aid strangers or travelers. Something that also struck me in these two books is the unique sort of narrative structure of the Odyssey itself. Famously, it's not a linear progression from the things that happened the earliest in time to the things that happened latest in time. Instead, as you encounter different people who have different pieces of information, they will tell you those pieces of information. So while the main or external narrative of these two books is basically just like Telemachus talks to Nestor, Telemachus talks to Menelaus, the suitors plot to kill Telemachus, those are the only things that happen in the regular timeline. But every person they encounter and talk to has these long stories and speeches about what happened at Troy and what happened on the way home from Troy. So you're not proceeding linearly through the events, you're doubling back and falling into these little story holes almost, where you tunnel into something and then come back out. So as you're going along within the main narrative, there will be these long digressions where one person or another tells a story. Some of the most famous incidents of the Odyssey, the most recognizable episodes, we don't see directly but have relayed to us by Odysseus, and we haven't gotten there yet. But it raises interesting questions because much of the content of the story, many of the episodes that populate Odysseus's return home from Troy, are not presented to us by a narrator that we might assume to be objective, but rather by a character who certainly has motivations and perspectives and biases of their own that we don't necessarily always take into account. So we haven't gotten there yet, but I think it's always interesting to think about how much of Odysseus's story Odysseus, the famous trickster and liar, tells to us. It's like 4 whole books that he's just telling a story, and knowing Odysseus, he could totally be full of crap. It's also interesting to note, I don't know if I realized this before or not, but the version of Agamemnon's death that Menelaus presents as relayed to him by Proteus, so that's a story within a story within a story, has Aegisthus kill Agamemnon at dinner instead of Clytemnestra killing Agamemnon in the bath, so it's a different version of the story than the one that appears in the Oresteia, which is interesting. Obviously, we know that there are many, many different versions of a given myth circulating at a given time, but it's interesting that the one that gets incorporated into the Odyssey is different than the one used by Aeschylus to write the Oresteia. So anyway, in these 2 books we get our first real tastes of the narrative pausing to allow someone to tell a story. I think a fairly popular critical interpretation of the Odyssey is that it's sort of Odysseus's tour through a variety of societies, of different ways of setting up a community, basically. And we have sort of our first reference to that kind of idea, our first line that touches on that kind of a theme in book 4. So again, we have Menelaus saying that Proteus told him that a gust of wind bore Agamemnon over waves where fish were jumping, across the rumbling depths to where all farms are finished, meaning where they don't farm anymore, where there are no farms because people do not farm. So that's the first reference to finding a civilization that functions differently from the civilization that you came from. Recall also that the Cyclops also do not farm. Everything just grows in abundance for them. And the implication is that that's kind of part of the problem, that is part of why they are so vicious and uncivilized, is that they don't have to work the land to get it to produce for them. But we can get into that later once we really get into the adventures of Odysseus himself, which of course will be happening tomorrow. Let me know if there are any topics or themes in the Odyssey that you would be interested to discuss, or that you would like to hear me noodle about a little bit, or if you don't have the energy for that, you can just leave me an emoji in the comments down below. Maybe that represents your favorite classic and I will try to guess. If you enjoyed this video, I do hope you will consider subscribing, and I will see you again soon. But in the meantime, I hope that everybody is staying happy, healthy, and safe, and I hope that somewhere out there there's a great book waiting just for you. Bye!